Thank you and welcome to everybody. Glad we got to do a quick introductions, and please feel free to use the chat box. Ann and I will make sure we keep track of things as they come in so we can work in your questions or comments. Hopefully as we go, or if we don't, we'll make sure by time we wrap up today we get a chance to either address them, or if not, we'll get back to you on those. We'll make sure you get a copy of these slides. We're going to be doing this presentation one more time. So we want to, we'll make sure we send them out after we do this presentation one more time. So that you might use them for reference or to share with others. But again, feel free to reach out as well. And we think we'll be together for about an hour. Let's see how long these things take. Some of this will move quickly at the beginning, but then you may have more questions as we get into sharing more about some of the ideas we have in mind for Illinois Empower. So with that, I want to go ahead and jump in and start sharing some information, and we'll look forward to, again, a little bit of chance to go back and forth here. So during our session today, we're going to, again, quickly cover the basics on Illinois Empower. It's, as we know, something that's new, so new information is becoming available and or becoming clear all the time, so we want to check our understanding together. Then we want to share what CEC has in mind as an approach to school improvement, the overall process of school improvement, and there'll be some emphasis on talking about this needs assessment time period that's going to be happening during the planning year. And then finally, we want to give you some specifics on some ways we've imagined doing this work during this planning year that might help you start to imagine what it would look like for your school or schools in your district. So some basics on Illinois Empower to begin, and then we'll get into, again, the heart of things. So we all know the Illinois Empower has come to us through the Every Student Succeeds Act, I hope by now, and that it is the name for the new structure that we're going to be using. And this is, for us at CEC, it means that the structure we'll be using as a learning partner. And for you in schools and districts, it'll be the structure you'll use to access school improvement services should you choose to use them. So just a little bit from ISB. They've focused on the idea of having greater choice and voice for school improvement. We hope that that ends up being the case for you as you go through here, and we would be part of one of those choices you could be making. And then the emphasis on really looking at this work holistically, which we are in great support of, looking at the whole child and looking at it in terms of the school, community, and the home to embrace all the components of what makes the learning environment for a student. Really quickly reviewing terms, we have Tier 4 schools, or schools who are qualified for comprehensive supports. And those schools will be required to choose a learning partner like CEC to support them in the planning and improvement work. And that's, roughly speaking, defined as the lowest 5% of schools. And learning partners are providers approved by ISB for Illinois Empower specifically. That's a new process that we have to be specifically approved as a learning partner through ISBE for Illinois Empower. And CEC has just recently signed our contract to do that, so we are in the very last phases of that approval process via ISB. Hopefully people have started to become familiar with these new accountability designations. We know that the focus has been on Tier 3 and Tier 4 over the summer, and with the new report card coming out, we'll be hearing more about these other tiers. But just a quick moment of defining those terms as they were laid out in the state's ESSA plan. And then when we think about Illinois Empower in terms of participation, we see that what we've been told is that Tier 1 and Tier 2 schools in the future are going to be able to apply to actually be a learning partner. That was not the case this round. Tier 3 schools have some requirements. They must complete an improvement plan that will be approved by their district. And then they have some opportunities. They may access the Illinois Empower funds that were made available and that will be made available if they complete a needs assessment. And if they're going to be using a outside partner, they will need to use an approved learning partner through Illinois Empower. Tier 4 schools have more requirements. They must participate in Illinois Empower, including taking care of that needs assessment process as well. And they must choose a learning partner for the improvement work. And that plan would ultimately be approved by ISB, not by the district. And we've already seen funding is available for that as well. The basic process, and then we'll be almost done with our overview here and get into some of the more details, is that there'll be a needs assessment time period, and we at CEC think that needs assessment time period is critical. We don't see it as just completing the IBAM rubric, as some people are saying, is the sort of the compliance requirement, if you will. That is what is required, but we see it as a much bigger opportunity for schools and districts to really start their school improvement work off in a strong way. And the categories of that work that the state has been helping to define is under 3 main headings: governance and management, curriculum and instruction, and climate and culture. I think we all would agree that those big headings really fit all of the work that we have to do in schools and districts every day to be successful. So that is the end of our quick sharing on trying to make sure we're on the same page about Illinois Empower. You, in fact, may have more information than what we've provided based on where you've accessed information from ISBE or from other partners. But we just wanted to make sure we shared those basics, and we can talk more about that as well. For the next few slides, I just want to share a little bit about CEC so you can get a feel for us. You may be somewhat familiar with us, or you may be new to us, and we want to make sure you just get a little sense of our work and who we are as we talk about this work with Illinois Empower. So we're a more than 30-year-old organization at this point. We've been doing this work across Illinois and increasingly in other places outside of Illinois. And we have a real strong focus in our work at CEC and empowering students through learning. So that's why in that diagram you see it at the heart of our work, is that we're really focusing on empowering students through learning. And in order to do that, going out into that green concentric circle, we have to think about how we are implementing really cutting-edge emerging teaching and learning practices. And in order to do that, we have to think differently about what it means to be an educator, to be a teacher in this profession. So we talk about the need to really change the way the profession organizes itself to really focus on empowering students through learning even more in this current 21st century environment. And as you may know about our history at CEC, we do that all with the overarching umbrella of thinking about how we're fostering collaboration. And we particularly focus on labor and management, but collaboration extends to all work that we do. And we really focus on using collaboration as a key tool in our work, and you may as well. But we certainly make sure that people know that when they get to know us, that we really focus on using collaborative processes to support our work. So one thing we've already mentioned, and we're going to be digging into this, is that in order to get the school improvement process started, you really have to take a look at where you are. And in that case, it means sometimes going deeper or further into looking where you are, or being broader and bringing more stakeholders to see where you are, so that you can get, not just for you as a leader in your district, but for all people in your district to have a clear sense of where your areas of strength are, what you're doing that is working and has been working, as well as where your opportunities are to improve. And it's one thing for leaders to know that, but it's another thing for that to be a widely shared belief, and that's part of what we can help to do to make sure that that is understood across a system. Just a little bit more on CEC. We believe in working with the 3 anchors, and we think that's a key to making work long-term and sustainable, because when the 3 anchors are working together, that means that the work is ultimately going to be aligned and sustained over time. So again, that's hearkening back to what we talked about in regards to collaboration and making sure that we have a system alignment. One thing we've been excited about in recent years, and we'll just share about this briefly, is new research that's happening and has been completed out of Rutgers University and out of Cornell University that helps to prove a lot about what we think is important at CEC about the way we do business. And that is that when there's increased partnership, and that's defined in a number of ways, but in particular partnership with labor and management, that helps to make sure that there is increased collaboration inside of schools. And that ultimately, through research, has proven to improve student achievement, educator retention, increases people's sense of professionalism, and the strength ultimately they see of teachers and staff as an organized group, as an association or union. So I put a research reference down there so you can get a look at that work done by Saul Rubenstein and John McCarthy. But we're excited at CEC about this work. It's a study that's done over hundreds of samples, and so many districts have participated in across the country, and very exciting to see some of that work ultimately be proven in research that we've been able to experience in the field over the years. So just a little bit more before we dive into specifics today. We want to be clear, and I think many people agree, but this is very important to us, that when you're talking about school improvement, we're talking about district improvement as well, meaning that the whole system has to think differently about the way the work is happening. So it's not just about a school that might be struggling, but it's ultimately about the relationship between the school and the district that might need to change or evolve or improve to better meet the needs of the school and the students. So that's why we make sure to point out that this isn't just the work of a school that needs to improve. This is ultimately a partnership between a district and its school or schools to improve. It might seem like a simple point to you, which is great, or it might seem like a point that gives you a little pause as you think about that, but it is definitely something that comes from our experience, that we need to make sure that everybody knows that they're involved in a major way in this work, and is excited to get going on this. Just want to mention in brief here something that we could go into more depth at another time with you, either individually or maybe in a future webinar. We've identified these 10 readiness factors, and when we say readiness, we don't mean that either you have them or you don't. We just mean it helps to take a good snapshot of where a school and a district are in relationship to their change process and in relationship to what they need to do for school improvement. The one I would point out very quickly and call out as a very important one is the principal. Ultimately, in a building that might be facing some new or some historical struggles, the principal is going to be the one to set the tone about how that work happens and what happens with that work. And we have found over and over again that a principal who is willing to really roll up their sleeves and be a lead learner and be a champion for the work, to both create urgency as well as to inspire, is a key component. Not the only one, but it really is a key lever and a key piece of what a successful school improvement process will be. If there's a principal who might feel tied to the status quo, that's usually not a good leading indicator or a readiness factor for a school in a district that is really attempting to make likely some significant changes to improve student performance. So just a little bit more about CEC as we think about our intensive school improvement work. And at CEC, we've been involved in school improvement since our inception, and in recent years, we've been involved in intensive school improvement work through SIG grants. We really emphasize this simple diagram you see, which really puts engaging learners at the center. So whatever we're doing, we're being learner-focused and learner-centered. And those smaller, those smaller circles that orbit around the engaging learners are the key levers to help make sure we're doing that. So how are we ultimately supporting leaders to be successful? How are we ultimately building collaboration from the classroom between the teacher and the student all the way up to the district leadership and the school board? And ultimately, that means we're improving systems up and down. And that's how we think about how we provide supports as a partner in the journey of school improvement. So hopefully these standards are starting to become familiar to you. These are what people are now calling the IBAM Quality Framework Standards. Those were put together by a committee that was put in place through legislation in 2015. So it's been around for a while and has been a real leader in shepherding some of the thinking around school improvement in Illinois. And now at this very useful juncture, we have these standards to help us think about how we improve schools in the next several years. The diagram to the right they have, or their graphic, is one that they use to kind of encompass all of the standards, as well as some of the other concepts that are important to supporting the success of schools, whether that be school funding, as you can see around the outside, or whether that be looking at the whole child in the very middle, that also encompasses the whole school and the whole community. So that's a pretty comprehensive representation of those quality framework standards, which ultimately help to define what a quality school and district look like when they're working together. There is an accompanying rubric for that, though the rubric is under further revision. It is a framework that will be constantly revised over the years to always make it better as people start to use it more and more. So at CEC, I mentioned earlier and previewed that we really want to focus on this needs assessment and planning your opportunity. So we broke it up into 7 phases when we are thinking about it. 7 phases is kind of a lot to hold in your head, so we'll refer back to this. But as you can see, it's a cycle that begins with getting ready, And we don't want to skip any of these early phases, though some of them might happen quite quickly. You might really get into the heart of your work as you get down to focusing your direction and building your collaborative teams. We don't want to skip over these first 3 phases. It's really what you might have heard referred to as a continuous improvement cycle. So this is an opportunity to do school improvement using a continuous improvement framework. You may already have some continuous improvement frameworks you're aware of or use in your district, and we certainly can always adapt to those. But this is a framework for thinking about the planning year in particular with Illinois Empower, so built specifically for this Illinois Empower planning year. So the needs assessment is the crucial first step. Wanted to highlight that. We don't just say that just from our experience, though our experience we think is valuable and yours as well. Also, we see that increasingly the field is saying that. The Alliance for Excellent Education, as you can see, came to this conclusion, and they used the metaphor of a doctor's prescription. So part of what we were saying to people is that we really need to get the diagnosis right so that we don't get in a situation where schools are using things that are ultimately the wrong medicine, if you will. So really working together with schools to identify where they are and figure out what their plan of action will be. An effective needs assessment really then gets you narrowed down to your most critical challenges and then helps you to plan for how you overcome those. Ultimately, a school improvement plan, when we do them, and is going to be something that's pretty actually concise and short, as opposed to something that tries to touch every last aspect of school operation. We really try to focus on the critical challenges and critical interventions that will make the biggest difference. Schools have a lot to do every day simply to run the school and be effective, and improvement efforts can't try to take on everything all at once. So ultimately, we've accessed a lot of resources from the Center for School Turnaround, a national group that's funded by federal dollars, and they've been around for several years, and they really do recommend the use of an external review to support diagnosis. And you'll hear that throughout this presentation, the idea that the needs assessment process, you can do some of that as a self-assessment, but ultimately there's great value in having external supports so that the leadership in a school in a district is freed up to also be a participant in the process and not always a leader in the process. And also an external set of eyes helps to open up opportunities to look into areas where it's harder to see when you're on the inside. So again, using external is a positive in this case to help support the diagnosis phase and planning for school improvement. One thing to know about us, and we kind of made a little informal here, is there's no shrink wrap. We don't have a school improvement package that we send you or a set of tools that we sell you. We really are about taking our frameworks and customizing them to where you are, or in many cases, taking where you are and making sure that our supports get customized to some of the directions you've begun. So ultimately, you'll see on the screen that we adapt our work to the local context. We also say up front that takes more time because it's not a program or it's not something that you can get a shipment of. We hope you like that. We hope that people find that to be useful. That's where collaboration is key. When we say collaboration, we're not just talking about the collaboration you do in your schools and in your district. We're talking about collaborating with us as well. So ultimately, we hope that that would be a way of operating that's exciting to you, and that it makes sure that we can bring any research-based or evidence-based practices forward, or you can bring them forward, and we do it in a way that makes sense in your school and your district. So now we're going to get to going through the process that we recommend. And as I just said a moment ago, it's what we recommend. So obviously, it's subject to talking to you about what it means in your local community to think about this. But we wanted to give you a sense of our best thinking on this and what it might look like to go through both a needs assessment process as well as coming up with a plan for next year that will ultimately help you start your improvement work in a very strong way. So we broke it up into phases, as you saw earlier. Getting ready is the first phase. Then we get into the assessment component, and then ultimately a little deeper into the assessment component is identifying priorities. So again, this is a part of the work that might go fast, but we think it's so important not to skip and to make sure that we've had a chance to support that in some way or be a part of that as you go through this type of work. You can see in parentheses, we're using the CEC pathway terminology, just if you're wondering what the parentheses are. We have a CEC pathway to school improvement, and we wanted to make sure we use some of our language. So we just showed the connection to how we're doing this work to our own pathway for improvement that we use when working with districts and schools. So let's go into phase 1 and 2 and 3 in some detail. The rest of the phases we won't go into as in much detail, but we wanted to go through phase 1, 2, and 3 in some detail. So in phase 1, the key here is to make sure that stakeholders are getting familiar with what we're doing, with what's happening in your school and your district. And in your school and district, you may be at different points in terms of the amount of communication you've had about what work you're about to do. And we understand that. So we want to make sure that there's a big picture here that gets built to help all stakeholders become knowledgeable about what's going on at the appropriate times in the appropriate ways. And also, it's really important the team you put together. You want to signal to your folks in your district that you're about to do something that's important. So you want to make sure the team is representative of all the important stakeholders. And so we can help support that. Here's some more detail. You can see the slides will follow a pattern of, on the left will be things that you'll be expected to do or planning to do. And going into the right side is the way CEC can support that. Briefly, wanted to just highlight the idea that we are ultimately going to be able to facilitate and support facilitation of work. And we also want to think on what kind of really engage stakeholders in a very inclusive way so that everybody feels that they are a part of this work. You can see there outlined some of the ideas we have in mind and some of the focus that we'll have. We really bring in a systems perspective, as we said earlier, to the school improvement work. So we want to make sure that we support you in thinking about this as a systems and district improvement process just as much as it is a school improvement process. And we have ways of helping to do that through our work. So that would be phase 1, getting ready. Phase 2 is ultimately the self-assessment component of this. This could be done using the IBAM standards, the quality framework standards. We also have other diagnostic tools that are available that are very much aligned to the quality framework standards. We want to make sure you meet the requirements that ISBE may require and use the kinds of tools that you think are most important. Whatever tools you're using and whatever tools end up being most important to you, you would make sure you complete a self-assessment, and then we would be there to support making sure that that assessment is used to further your school improvement effort. Not simply for a compliance activity to say you did it, but actually it's a way to start the dialogue in the school and get the ball rolling. So just a little bit more detail on that is that we'd have members of your needs assessment team complete the self-assessment, and we actually have them do that confidentially so that we can get their true blue opinions of what's going on and from their point of view. And then we can help to interpret those results. So that way, in some cases, we work with schools and they have a very close and shared understanding of where they are as a school. And in some cases, they have a lot of different points of view and perspectives. And neither one is right or wrong, but it's important for it to be known how close or how far apart a team is in terms of their view of what's going on in the school. So we ultimately can help present those results and facilitate a productive discussion about what those results are. And at this point, we won't be asking to form a full consensus. We'd be asking simply to hear each other's points of view and bring those points of view forward. So that's phase 2, where you're really engaged in the self-assessment work. Phase 3 really goes deeper in the diagnostic work and helps to set direction. So by the end of this phase, you will have prioritized your areas of improvement. But before that, you've really gone out of your assessment team, engaged stakeholders in looking at where the strengths and the opportunities for improvement are for your school. And also key in this phase is that CEC would like to bring a listening visit to your school where we actually bring in CEC staff to help come talk to stakeholders and actually do a comparison or validation to understand how widely shared the view of the team self-assessment is across your school and your district. So a little more detail on that here is that it's a reflective process ultimately for your school to look at its strengths and its opportunities for improvement. And we would again bring a team on site to your school to help support that reflective process and identify those strengths and opportunities for improvement. And ultimately give a chance for your needs assessment team to compare what the CEC team learned and heard versus what they had believed was going as the biggest strengths and opportunities for improvement. And that sets the stage to be able to prioritize it. So again, we help to support the process there of making sure that we can bring in stakeholders and come up with priorities that at the end of it, they're not one person's priorities, they're not the priorities of a small group, but they're the priorities of the school and the district. So with that, we're moving around our continuous improvement cycle here. We'd be looking at ending the needs assessment phase and getting into really the planning phase so that you're planning and developing a way forward to improve your school. So that would be what we would call phase 4 in this case, focusing direction. I'm going to go through this a little bit faster for the sake of time and detail. If we want to go back and get into some more detail later in our time together, I think we'll have plenty of time before the end of the hour to have some discussion. So we should be okay if we want to go into more detail on these. But for the sake of giving you reasonable information, this a little bit higher level side, we want to get ourselves into the improvement process. So we represent that here by a simple diagram that also kind of, you can see it maps to plan, do, study, act. Lots of people are familiar with PDSA from over the years. You can see that we want to get into 4 main chunks here. We want to focus our direction, make sure our collaborative teams are built, or if they're already built, that we've refined them. We want to make sure we focus on learning ultimately, and then secure accountability. And when we talk about accountability here, we're not speaking of heavy top-down accountability, but rather how do we hold each other accountable for all the work that we're about to do. The best kind of accountability is the internal accountability to each other as a team. So just a little bit more on our framework here. We really use and borrow from Michael Fullen's coherence framework. So if you're familiar with that, this might be a useful thing to keep in mind. You'll notice our 4 phases are mapped onto the coherence framework that we just shared a moment ago. And you can really, starting in the upper right corner there with collaborative cultures, is where we'll be spending some time in a moment. One thing to notice about the way Fullen does this is leadership is at the center. Leadership is guiding this as we go. And that is key, that this is really a 4-chambered heart, he sometimes says. So all of these things work together. This is, though we're presenting this as a set of phases, this work is comprehensive, and this work has to all be in some sort of coordination, like you might see in a heart. You cannot be just doing this in step by step. You have to really work together on a lot of these things. So again, take a look at this framework. We certainly can follow up with providing more resources if this is a new framework to you. It's one we found very valuable because it's big enough to catch a lot of the important work that schools and districts end up wanting to do. So let's go into a little bit more detail on this. We'll be starting in the focusing direction section, whereas if you look in that upper left quadrant, that's where we make sure we have shared purpose and we have a small number of goals, and our strategy is clear to everyone, not just the leaders, but to everyone. And that we really are finding a way to move this forward using our change management and change knowledge savvy. So in phase 4, we really get into the root causes of school strengths and areas for improvement. We want to know why you're successful. What is it you think it's important, because it sets the stage for the action going forward. And not all root causes can be addressed. So we have to also pick, in some ways, choose the root causes that are most important to us. Root causes can't all be addressed, but we have to choose the ones that we think are most important. So again, we want to make sure the strategy is clear to all stakeholders ultimately. So in this phase, you're going to be making sure you have a manageable plan for school improvement, and that is communicated in the form of goals to all stakeholders. So again, like the other slides, we have some detail here. You can see on the school side, it culminates in having your school improvement goals written. And you can see on the CEC side that ultimately we're supporting making sure good research-based work is being identified, and that we're using CEC resources and tools to support that process. that leads the way of focusing your direction to have those most important few school improvement goals. In phase 5, this is, again, we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, this is where CEC spends a lot of its time and energy. When we think about the basis for improvement, it's around collaboration and collaborative culture. So in this phase, we really want to work with you to check your systems, if you will, and to check your collaborative culture. And so you can see we put an importance on decision-making in communication structures. We also looked at to make sure for alignment, to make sure your goals are aligned so that the teacher in the classroom understands the connection between the work they're doing on their team, maybe in their grade level, as it's connected to their school building, as it's connected to the greater school district. We also want to make sure we work on relationships. Sometimes relationships need some time, some healing, some repair, and we want to make sure we create spaces and opportunity for that. So ultimately, people feel like their voice is valued and that their input is valued. Again, our focus here is on that collaborative culture and collaborative process. Again, you can see some more details about what CEC has in mind there, but ultimately we support your collaborative culture and building upon what you have in place, or in some places maybe refining or even rebuilding certain things with you to make sure that they're as strong as they can be, so that those collaborative structures and that collaborative culture can be the thing that carries you through as you go through school improvement. Phase 6 is deepening learning. So ultimately, we're getting here into what is the learning going to be for adults and what's the learning going to be for students. So we want to make sure we've identified a small number of strategies that are going to help you meet your goals. And we want to make sure that those strategies are focused on academic, behavior, social, emotional needs of each learner. And ultimately, that we've taken the time and looked for the time to do this. One of the biggest challenges we face in schools and districts every day is that there's not enough time. And that is true. So we have to even work harder when we're in an intensive school improvement process or a targeted school improvement process to make sure the time is available for educators to get the work done together. So that may mean taking a look at the calendar, taking a look at the schedule, taking a look at a variety of things to help make sure that there's time to do this work. This work can't be done on top of. This work is going to have to be have some of its own space. You can see some more details here about how we want to deepen learning. So you can kind of take a good look at that for now. But heading towards the end of our sharing time and going to get into our opportunity to ultimately hear from you if you have questions or comments. So again, deepening learning emphasizes making sure that there is a plan in place, and that plan will support adult learning. We can't skip that part. Adults have to learn new practices and be given time and support to do that. And that's where the factor, again, I mentioned of time comes in. How do we make sure we build a plan that does that? So again, this is a chance to think about really having those plans of action that are going to make sense. When you get to the final phase we have in mind, you ultimately want to be able to answer the question whether what we're doing is making a difference, and how do we know? So have you taken the time to set up systems, and we would help you to make sure that you know you're making a difference. And we want to make sure that gets set up before the work starts, not after we're far down the road together, but make sure that that's in place and that there's a system to report those results and there's a system to adjust. Because when we put a strategy in place in the planning phase, we have to see what happens in real time and how it's working. So we might have to adjust or even abandon things. We really want to focus on adjusting first, because hopefully your process will be very thoughtful and you have made really good decisions about what strategies you want to pursue. So hopefully we're being careful to make sure there's regular checks in that continuous improvement process to adjust the work and to say, is this plan working? And if it is, how do we know? So a little more detail on what we have in mind there. But again, you're going to invest a lot of time and resources into this work, so you want to make sure you get a return on that investment. And we'll be there to support, to make sure you're asking yourself the hard questions and using the data to drive your thinking, and help you to develop some of those new systems you might need to monitor your work or monitor this work in particular. So that really completes going through the full phases of how to take advantage of this planning year. It is a lot, I will admit. However, much of it is is in the detail of explaining to you how clear we want to be in explaining this in detail to you, so you have a sense of how we think and how we approach this work. Ultimately, we broke this down into 2 main opportunities. We want to, of course, again, remind you that we will need to customize this in some ways. But there's an individual pathway, which would mean your district would engage with CEC to work individually with us, whether it be with your school or a group of schools in your district. And that would be a set of work that would go through the school year. And it would include that listening visit we talked about. And it goes through all 7 of the phases we just mentioned. And it would be done in a variety of formats. You know, we know that time is hard, and you can't change your calendar for this school year very easily. So we would do that in a variety of formats, whether it be some after school sessions, some evening sessions, some taking advantage of maybe some half-day or full-day opportunities where you might have calendar opportunities. That's the individual pathway. The network opportunity, I know there's been a lot of interest in this, also is an exciting way to think about this work. And that is using a regional network environment, working with other districts purposely in a very intentional network over 5 full days, starting in hopefully late October is where we're targeting our dates, and getting you through the spring, almost to the end of the school year. This would also have a component of a CEC learning visit. We'd have to determine that date, and it would be in the winter, would be the most likely date, but we'd have to determine that together. And it would get you through at least the first 5 phases that we just outlined of this work at the end of that in a network setting. So we think that would be an exciting way to create a community of learning that allowed some efficiencies there, as well as some opportunity to learn between district. All right, we're really headed to the final phase here, and we can take a pause and do some questions very soon here. Want to just highlight a couple of important dates. We'll repeat this webinar. We'll do it live again, but we'll repeat it on Tuesday in case you have other colleagues you think you want to hear some of this information. So just want to remind that you of that to pass it on if that is useful for you in your school and your district. And then also just a reminder about an ISB webinar coming up. ISB is going to be doing a webinar about the IBAM quality framework and rubric, and that'll be coming up next week as well, and well worthwhile all of us checking out to make sure we're understanding some of the guidance that ISB is providing schools and districts as we move into this Illinois Empower structure. Briefly, I just wanted to highlight there's some CEC resources on our website. In the winter and spring, I co-authored a series of short articles called Finding the Power in Illinois Empowered, using a school improvement and transformation framework. And that's roughly represented by numbers 2 through 6 there. And each article goes into depth on each of those main framework components. So I wanted to call your attention that if you hadn't had a chance to access that, that's some quick reading. It would both hopefully give you some insights because it's very research-based, but also give you some insights as well about CEC, because you also get a chance to see how we think about and talk about school improvement work in another format. Finally, in general, just want to remind you could go to our website and view our programs and services. We break them down into those 6 groupings on our website, and that would give you a sense of the variety of services and supports that we provide at CEC, though we have a specific pathway in mind for our work here with Illinois Empower. We always draw in all of our work at CEC to do work with schools and districts. And again, a big part of our pathway is targeting our supports. So we would want to make sure we target our supports for where you are and what you need. And this planning year process would be, one of the outcomes of it would be just that you would know very well your targets, and we would be able to support targeting our supports to match where you needed to be. So again, that's just on our website. And just my contact information. Many CEC colleagues will be involved in this work, but I want to make sure you have a point of contact with me should you need to talk with me or to follow up or have additional questions that maybe weren't answered today, or you just have some individual questions. Like I said at the top, we hope this is the beginning of a conversation and dialogue. I know basically you've been hearing me talk for the last chunk of time here, and appreciate you hanging in there. So certainly want a chance to hear from you either individually or in fact now. We can definitely open it up for questions or comments on the webinar right now. You would just need to unmute yourself, or if you have any trouble with that, I can unmute you as well. But before we go today, certainly want to thank you for your time and thank you for your willingness to listen to this information, and welcome your feedback going forward on how we can support your work and support you better in what you need for school improvement work ahead in your district and in your school. So with that, I'd love to open up for questions or comments. And if there's anything in the chat box, you could share that with me as well. Make sure you draw that out.
So here's one question. Do you have a sample of the needs assessment survey you would use?
Sure. So what we have in place is one that's based on IBAM standards, the IBAM quality framework standards. We know that all schools and districts are being encouraged, if not required, to use that. We also have several tools that use CEC resources that we have in place that we use for diagnostics. So I guess the thing I would say is that the needs assessment survey is, in fact, the IBAM quality framework done in a survey fashion. And then if that was a tool that you already felt like you wanted to build upon or supplement, we have other tools we could share. We have one called the boundary audit that's explained a little bit about on our website, and we can follow up with more on that, as well as the system assessment. That's another tool used for diagnostic work. And those can be customized to your district, but those are ways for CEC to do and support needs assessment, or what we call diagnostic work usually. Other questions people have? What other questions are out there that people would like to ask before we go today? I just was going to check out the chat box myself. Great. Well, hearing no more questions for the moment, I'll give you a chance in just a moment to see if you have anything before we head to the exits here. Want to thank you again for your time. I hope you found this informative. Again, I hope you heard the message loud and clear that we feel that needs assessment is an important set of work, and it's really one that takes quite a bit of intensive thinking and time. So that's why we're excited about the planning year option. And I hope you heard loud and clear that we try to customize our work to make sure it fits the needs of where you are, and would be interested in continuing the conversation to hear where you are and to hear how the things we have in mind might be useful to you. I know that over the next several weeks, we're going to be getting a lot more information about Illinois Empower. We hope to come back to you with information to propose more about our individual pathway as well as our network pathway. We have dates we're already targeting on our calendars, and we just want to confirm that. And of course, we'd be getting back to you as well about our pricing structure for those resources, so that you know what the associated resources you'd have to dedicate to do that work with us. And I know you're probably interested to see where the final designations ultimately are going to be at the end of October. That's obviously important for your district to know whether you have less schools or more schools that you need to be considering as part of this process. So please know that we're interested in being in a conversation with you. CEC, over its more than 30 years, prides itself on being collaborative. So we certainly don't come to the table with all the answers. We come to the table, we hope, with really good questions that helps you determine your answers. And we bring to bear our experience from school improvement work that we hope you'll find useful as you get started on your work. So again, thank you to everybody. Before we go, I'd like to offer one last chance for questions if people have any questions remaining. You can type them in or chime in by unmuting, or raise your hand, I'll unmute you. All right, well, I won't keep asking for you to talk. Thank you for being here today, and have a great rest of your afternoon. I hope wherever you are, you're having a great day. And please don't be shy about reaching out. Thanks, everyone.